Good morning. You listen to FloorDaily.net, and I'm Kemp Harr. I'm in Dallas, Texas at the Total Solutions Plus meeting, and I'm with Joe Lundgren of Joe Lundgren Consulting. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Kemp.
Most people know your background. You spent several years as head of marketing for Dale Tile, and you've been out now for, about the last 10 years?
Yeah, it's actually been just about 7.5 years now, so it's been a fun time.
The last time I spoke with you was at Coverings, and I missed you this year at your site. First, tell us how the tile market's doing this year from a growth perspective.
I think we're growing overall as an industry for floor coverings, in that 4% range, but I'd say the ceramic is around 2 to 3%. I think we're seeing the imports are getting the growth. U.S. manufacturers aren't, but I believe we're really being significantly impacted by the increase that we see in the LVT market, as we all know, and LVT, WPC, SPC is a very viable category and really attacking us specifically into the wood, where it's a good 30% of our overall ceramic market look now.
All right, so you're saying 2 to 3%, and you can look at this two different ways. I'm looking kind of for a consumption number, which would include imports as well as domestic. TCNA puts these numbers out in March or April of every year, and I remember the last 2 years. 2 years ago, it was 5.8% growth, and last year it was 4.7% growth. So you're saying we're continuing to see a little taper coming down.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but I think we are overall on consumption for the ceramic category as a whole.
A couple things. You talked about LVT and its competition. It's a cheaper alternative and easier to install. So that's a factor. Let's talk about tariffs. First, we've got the 10%, which just kicked in last month, but the 25% is coming in January. What effect is that going to have on the business?
If you talk to the big importers, they say, well, we have three options. One is I'm going to pass it all along. 2 is I'm going to split it with the end user. And 3 is I'm going to switch countries. And that's a good thing on paper. The reality is pulling that off. I think that you'll see specific categories from China like glass where they dominate. We'll just see a big pass on of that to where the consumer is going to absorb that. And I don't think it'll impact it that much because, you look at the glass market, primarily a lot of it's being used on backsplashes. 40 feet, backsplash, not going to impact us that much. Tile, it'll be interesting to see because if you look at the imports specifically from China, predominantly out on the West Coast because of the low-cost freight to get it there. But the alternative to get product to California from U.S. manufacturers, which are predominantly back in Tennessee, with the high increase of inland freight out to the West Coast, it will be interesting to see if we see some of the Chinese lower their prices and not have to do it significantly to where it's about comparable with that 25%. Now, I know there's some companies making big shifts right now to do that, but we'll have to see over the first few months the impact that makes.
A 25% tariff at FOB factory ends up to be about a 17% once you get it here landed. So it will be interesting to see. We know that China is the largest manufacturing country in volume, but it's usually lower in goods. I think the biggest impact is going to be to the home centers, to floor and decor, and to the tile shop, because more than half of what they sell comes from China, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that is correct, and both being public companies, they've been up front on that. But at the same time, you think about both those companies and their models, and Floor & Decor touts a lot of how good their sourcing model is, and with the results they've shown, they are very good at it and don't think that they're sitting back on their laurels. They've got contingency plans set up, and with their model of how they can move product in and out, is what is very different. So they've got a great model. I think we'll see them adjust and lean to existing companies like Spain or down in Brazil to be able to fill the gaps where they need to. And yes, 50% is from there, but I think we'll also see some Southeast Asia countries step up. I think Vietnam, who's one of the biggest producers in the world, will step up. Malaysia, Indonesia, who are not at full capacity, will start to see product come in there. And then don't forget India. India, has attacked every country that has put anti-dumping against China, and every one of those countries' imports from India have soared afterwards. So I think the Indians will figure out our U.S. market and adjust.
All right, I read your report from Chersai. You said there was probably too much emphasis on large panels at that show. Tell us what's going on in that business.
In Europe, it's obviously a lot stronger than it is in the United States. And you mentioned installation earlier, and we're more expensive against other floor coverings. But I think we're also uneducated in the large format porcelain installation, and that's where the industry is doing a lot of great work through NTCA to focus on that. But I looked at of the 900 vendors over there, factory showing, all of them had their own line. And so there's a lot of emphasis on that, and as we go from the 3 millimeter into 6, 12, and 20, we see the transition into countertops, which I think for tile contractors, specifically in our industry, is a new revenue stream, whereas granite and quartz was traditionally done by the fabricator. We see this opening up because of the installation techniques as something tile contractors can do once they're trained.
Let's move to the latest news in the business. Mohawk bought Eliane in Brazil. Do you see any other acquisitions coming down? Do you see any other new factories being built here in the U.S.? Do we have more capacity here in the U.S. than we need? Those are a few questions for you.
Yes. Well, right now, I think the imports are dominating the U.S., and I think I know there's idle capacity within the United States, and the hope is the tariffs will change that. I think that remains to be seen. The U.S. manufacturers have to get more competitive to be able to compete with the strong dollar, unfortunately, we're experiencing, and so that's one big piece that I see there. The Eliane acquisition, I think, was a great one for Mohawk, and they always want to participate in other markets because they want to be able to participate in other markets' economies so that they're not stuck like we were in 2009 with the recession with a lot of the business in North America. Small here, but good around the world.
All right, let's talk about distribution. We've talked about this before. There's kind of 3 buckets there. There's the big 3, which is Bedrosian, MSI, Emser. Then there's the independents, and then there's the company-owned or affiliated. So who's winning here in this distribution play right now?
The independent distributor of yesteryear is starting to decline. We see some of those getting acquired. Crossville's done some acquisitions, and the Virginia Tile Group has started to do that and birthed into what I call the mega distributor, where they are either going national, i.e. like Emser or MSI, or they have a very strong regional footprint like East Coast Tile on East Coast and Arizona Tile. The mega distributors, who are very good from a brand perspective, are growing, or they're maintaining their share, and they're changing with the market. I think the independent distributors, where we see the decline happening, and it's shifting over to the home center market. And I think the 5th channel that we really have to look at is almost like a retail channel, which I really don't put Floor and Decor and the tile shop in that, because the Floor and Decor and tile shop, they're marketing straight to the pro. And I take the quote from one of them, and I say, we market to the pro who influences the consumer, different than the home centers where they market to the consumer. Their model, the tile shop, they just announced they had some good turnarounds with Bob Ruckert coming back, and the Floor and Decor will still continue to see growth in there. The other channel, home center, a little bit slow, but the independent distributors are losing share to these other channels.
Well, while you're talking about home centers and these category killers, we just did an analysis, and most people know, since Floor & Decor is a publicly traded company, they're up 28%, or on same-store comps, they're 12%. The home centers are flat in tile right now, and as we know, the tile shops had issues before, but as you say, it may be turning around. So, and then you see in those big 3 we're talking about, you see MSI now in the LVT business. So it does continue to evolve. Okay, Joe, it's good to catch up with you. Thanks for an update on the ceramic tile market. Again, been talking to Joe Lundgren, a consultant in the tile business, and you've been listening to Kemp Harr and FloorDaily.net.